Did you know that one of history's most feared rulers, Ivan the Terrible, wrote heartfelt love letters to his sixth wife, pleading for her affection like a lovesick poet? It's a side of him you'll never find in history books. For every royal figure we think we know, there are countless secrets buried beneath the polished portraits and official record stories that paint them not just as distant rulers, but as complex, flawed, and utterly human. Today, we're pulling back the velvet curtain on legendary kings and queens to uncover the truths that time almost forgot. Imagine standing in the shadow of a throne where power and personality collide in ways that defy expectation. Behind every grand coronation and bloody battle, there were private obsessions, scandalous romances, and bizarre quirks that shaped the course of history. What if Cleopatra's most brilliant political move wasn't her alliance with Rome, but a hidden talent for languages that let her eavesdrop on enemies? Or that Queen Victoria, the stern face of an empire, secretly wrote passionate notes to her husband in Hindi? These aren't just footnotes, they're the missing pieces that redefine how we see these icons. This isn't a dry stroll through history. It's a treasure hunt for the moments when legends stepped off their pedestals. We'll meet kings who dodged assassins with decoys, queens who ruled from behind puppet thrones, and monarchs whose personal demons changed kingdoms. Some revelations will make you laugh, others might make you question everything you learned in school. But one thing's certain, by the end, you'll never look at a crown the same way again. So settle in, we're about to rewrite the royal rulebook, one astonishing fact at a time. Cleopatra wasn't just a queen, she was a linguistic prodigy. While most rulers relied on translators, she spoke at least 9 languages fluently, a skill so rare it left diplomats and enemies stunned. Imagine the advantage of whispering threats in a rival's native tongue or laughing at secrets whispered behind her back. Her fluency in Egyptian alone set her apart. No other Ptolemy ruler bothered to learn it, but she mastered it to connect with her people. Then there were the languages of power, Greek for philosophy, Latin for politics, and dialects from Ethiopia to Hebrew, turning every conversation into a strategic weapon. Her multilingual brilliance shines in the story of her first meeting with Julius Caesar. When he arrived in Alexandria, she didn't send ambassadors, she wrapped herself in a carpet and had it delivered to his chambers. But what happened next is often overlooked. She spoke to him not in Greek, the language of her dynasty, but in flawless Latin. Caesar, a man who despised being spoken down to, was instantly disarmed. Here was a queen who could debate him in his own tongue, matching wit for wit. That single choice shifted the balance of power, laying the groundwork for their alliance. With Mark Antony, she took it further. Plutarch writes that when he tried to impress her by hunting, she outshot him, then teased him in his own crude soldier's slang, a dialect even his generals struggled to decode. Language wasn't just communication for Cleopatra, it was theater, manipulation, survival. While Rome saw her as a seductress, her real power lay in the words she wielded. She didn't just rule Egypt, she out-talked, out-negotiated, and out-thought every threat to her throne. In a world where kings fell to misunderstandings, she made sure every syllable served her kingdom. While Cleopatra used words to command power, Henry VIII ruled England with a different kind of artistry music. Behind the infamous tales of wives and wars, this king was an accomplished composer and musician, a fact often drowned out by the drama of his reign. His court wasn't just a place of political intrigue, it was a stage where Henry himself performed, plucking the strings of his lute with the same intensity he applied to matters of state. His most famous composition, Pastime with Good Company, wasn't just a royal hobby, it was a manifesto set to music, celebrating the pleasures of court life while subtly reinforcing his authority as a cultured Renaissance monarch. The king didn't just dabble, he excelled. Records describe him playing the lute, harpsichord, and recorder with genuine skill, often entertaining ambassadors and nobles personally. Imagine the shock of foreign diplomats expecting stern negotiations, only to find the burly king strumming a lively tune before discussing treaties. Music was his weapon of charm, a way to disarm and impress in equal measure. His personal songbook, filled with his own compositions and arrangements, still survives today, a rare glimpse into the mind of a ruler who saw melody as inseparable from majesty. But there's a twist to this harmonious portrait. Some historians believe Henry's love of music wasn't purely artistic, it was strategic. Court musicians enjoyed unusual favor, even during his most tyrannical periods, suggesting he valued their talents as political tools. When he sought to divorce Catherine of Aragon, his composers crafted propaganda songs to sway public opinion. And when Anne Boleyn caught his eye, music became their shared language. She was an accomplished dancer, and their courtship played out in private concerts and masquerades. In a reign defined by rupture, music remained Henry's constant, a refuge and a ruse, a passion and a performance. The real brilliance lies in how he blurred the lines between art and authority. While other kings built armies, Henry built orchestras, understanding that culture could conquer hearts as surely as swords could take lands. His compositions subtly echoed his policies, joyful on the surface, but with an undercurrent of control, reminding listeners that even leisure happened by the king's grace. Few realize that one of history's most notorious monarchs left behind not just broken marriages and religious upheaval, but melodies that still resonate 5 centuries later. How's that for a royal encore? Catherine the Great wore her crown with an ink-stained finger because while history remembers her as the empress who expanded Russia's borders, her true revolution played out in letters. For over 2 decades, she maintained a lively correspondence with Voltaire, the sharpest wit of the Enlightenment, trading quips about philosophy and power across thousands of miles. Their exchanges weren't just polite courtesies, they were intellectual sparring matches where Catherine held her own against the era's greatest minds. She didn't just rule an empire, she rewrote its script, one handwritten page at a time. What's astonishing isn't just that she wrote to thinkers like Diderot and Montesquieu, but how she engaged them. When Diderot faced financial ruin, Catherine bought his entire library, then let him keep it, even paying him a salary as its librarian. Voltaire, no flatterer, called her the Star of the North and praised her reforms, though both knew she ruled with an iron grip beneath the enlightened veneer. Their letters mixed lofty ideals with sly humor. She once joked about sending him Siberian reindeer for his garden, while he teased her about ruling barbarians with a philosopher's pen. But here's the twist, this wasn't mere performance. Catherine absorbed their ideas into real policy. She drafted a groundbreaking legal code inspired by Montesquieu's principles, championed education for girls, and even attempted smallpox inoculation campaigns. Yet the contradictions were glaring. The same queen who wrote passionately about liberty crushed peasant revolts and expanded serfdom. Enlightenment thinkers turned a blind eye, dazzled by her patronage. Diderot, after visiting her court, admitted she could talk like Socrates while acting like Caesar. Her genius lay in the balance. By playing philosopher queen, she softened Russia's image abroad, luring European talent to her academies. When Voltaire died, she tried to buy his papers, knowing their value as propaganda. Those letters became her diplomatic weapon, proof that a woman ruling what Europe saw as a backward realm could outthink them all. The ink dried long ago, but the lesson remains. Sometimes the mightiest throne is a writing desk. Louis XIV didn't just rule France, he danced across it, turning his court into a stage where power pirouetted in silk slippers. Long before he became the Sun King, he was a young monarch who dazzled audiences not with decrees, but with his flawless arabesques. At 15, he performed the role of Apollo in the Ballet de la Nuit, a lavish spectacle lasting 12 hours, where his golden costume and radiant solos birthed his iconic nickname. But this wasn't just royal vanity. Ballet was his political weapon. choreographed to outshine rebellious nobles and cement his divine right to rule. Imagine Versailles before the Hall of Mirrors, a makeshift theater where aristocrats jostled for seats to watch their king leap higher, spin faster, and command attention in ways no speech ever could. Louis didn't just appear in these productions, he starred in over 40, mastering complex techniques usually reserved for professionals. His performances weren't mere entertainment, they were calculated displays of vigor, proving his body and by extension his kingdom was untouchable. When nobles grumbled about his centralizing power, he invited them to dance alongside him literally. Those who stumbled in courtly steps found themselves sidelined politically, while those who matched his grace won favor. The Ballet de la Nuit itself was a stroke of propaganda genius. Its plot, darkness yielding to dawn, with Louis as the sun god banishing chaos. Every detail, from the astronomically accurate star patterns on the backdrops to the synchronized movements of courtiers turned, planets orbiting him, screamed one message: the king was France's center of gravity. Even his costume, studded with real gems that caught candlelight, made him shimmer like a celestial body. Foreign ambassadors left whispering not of his armies but of his otherworldly presence, exactly as intended. But here's the twist most miss. Louis didn't abandon ballet when he grew older, he institutionalized it. In 1661, he founded the Académie Royale de Danse, the precursor to the Paris Opera Ballet, effectively turning his hobby into Europe's first professional dance academy. The very positions and techniques we associate with classical ballet today, the turned-out feet, the precise arm placements were codified under his watch, transforming a royal pastime into high art. His legacy, a king who didn't just wear his crown, he danced it into history, proving that sometimes the most enduring revolutions begin with a perfect fifth position. Elizabeth I ruled England with an iron will, yet this formidable queen had an unexpected weakness: roses. Strange, considering the Tudor rose symbolized her dynasty's power. But for Elizabeth, their petals hid terror, not triumph. Court records reveal she'd recoil if one brushed her sleeve, banishing the offending flower from her presence. Some historians trace this fear to the Wars of the Roses, the bloody conflict between her ancestors that turned the bloom into a harbinger of betrayal. Every thorn might have whispered of severed heads and shifting allegiances. Then there's the darker theory. Roses reminded her of the Tower's gardens where her mother, Anne Boleyn, took final walks before her execution. Imagine a young Elizabeth, heir to a throne stained by that tragedy, forever linking the flowers sent with treason's price. Even her coronation portraits avoid roses striking, given how other monarchs flaunted them. She preferred pearls, cold and unchanging, over blossoms that wilted. Yet the irony is delicious. Despite her phobia, Elizabeth's reign saw the rose mythologized like never before. Poets likened her to the Rosa Electa, a divine flower above thorns of lesser mortals. When she punished rebellious earls, pamphlets showed her trampling rogue roses underfoot. The queen who feared them became the one who redefined them, twisting her dread into propaganda. That's the paradox of power. Sometimes what frightens us most becomes our legend's cornerstone. Frederick the Great of Prussia wielded his flute like a second scepter, an instrument of war and wonder in equal measure. While history remembers him as the military genius who transformed Prussia into a European power, his palace echoed with a very different sound most nights, the delicate trill of his silver flute. Far from a casual hobby, music was his refuge, his therapy, and his secret weapon. He composed over 100 sonatas and 4 symphonies, insisting on nightly concerts at Sanssouci Palace even during wartime, as if proving that art could flourish alongside artillery. Picture the scene: a king fresh from battlefield maneuvers, still dusted with the grime of conquest, changing into silk robes to play intricate concertos before hand-picked guests. His court musicians, including the renowned Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, knew better than to flatter him. Frederick demanded perfection. If a note faltered, he'd stop mid-performance, scowling until the piece restarted. His fingers, calloused from reins and sword grips, danced across the flute's keys with precision that stunned professionals. Voltaire, no stranger to irony, quipped that Prussia had a warlike musician for a king and a peaceful philosopher for a fool, a jab at their own complicated friendship. But here's what few grasp: these concerts weren't escapism, they were strategy. Frederick used music to control his public image, commissioning portraits of him in contemplative poses with his flute, softening his reputation as a battle-hardened autocrat. When he hosted foreign dignitaries, the concerts became psychological warfare, a proof that Prussia's culture matched its military might. After crushing Austria in the War of Austrian Succession, he invited defeated Habsburg diplomats to his private performances, rubbing salt in their wounds with sonatas instead of speeches. The darkest twist lies in the music itself. Listen closely to his compositions, like the poignant flute sonata in a minor, and you'll hear hints of a man haunted by war's toll. He once wrote that the flute is the only voice that understands my melancholy, a startling admission from a ruler who banned mourning at state funerals. His adagios slow to a crawl, heavy with a grief he never voiced in court. In one eerie parallel, his final composition, abruptly cut off mid-measure, mirrors his own deathbed scene, where he demanded to be wrapped in his military cloak. The flute's song silenced, but the echo of a king who found no peace without it lingers. Frederick's legacy, a monarch who conquered lands by day and scales by night, proving that even the fiercest leaders carry hidden harmonies. His flute didn't just accompany history, it composed it, one aching note at a time. Marie Antoinette's name conjures images of diamond necklaces and heartless extravagance, but history did her dirty. Behind the "let them eat cake" myth was a queen who quietly funded orphanages, hospitals, and even a home for unwed mothers. While Parisian pamphlets painted her as indifferent, court ledgers reveal she devoted nearly a third of her private income to charity, a fact revolutionary propaganda conveniently erased. Her most poignant act, transforming the Château de St. Cloud into a sanctuary for blind children, personally ensuring they received music lessons and warm clothing. This wasn't performative generosity. She banned press coverage of her visits, insisting kindness needed no audience. The infamous cake quote itself was stolen. Literary scholars traced it to a 50-year-old tale about a Spanish princess, repurposed to stoke rage against the Austrian-born queen. In truth, when bread shortages hit, Marie Antoinette slashed palace expenses to fund grain shipments, writing to her mother, "If I cannot give them bread, I will at least share their hunger." Her notebooks list thousands of pensions paid to struggling families, often signed simply, "A friend." Even as mobs stormed Versailles, she was drafting plans for a free clinic, a document found unfinished on her desk after her arrest. So how did history remember only the caricature, blame a perfect storm of xenophobia and political scheming? Her enemies weaponized her foreign roots, depicting charity as patronizing Austrian meddling. Playwrights staged crude skits where she tossed coins to peasants while laughing, pure fiction, but the people believed. The revolution needed a villain, and the Queen's diamond-adorned portrait made better propaganda than her hospital blueprints. The cruelest twist, many institutions she funded stayed open through the Reign of Terror, their anonymous patron's identity erased. Today, in the archives of Parisian orphanages, you'll find crumbling ledgers with entries marked only by a discreet fleur-de-lis, the lost receipts of a queen who cared too quietly. Nero didn't just want to rule Rome, he wanted to be Rome's greatest performer. While most emperors chased military glory, this infamous ruler poured his energy into scandalous passions, singing tragic arias, acting in raucous comedies, and even racing chariots. To the aristocracy's horror, Nero treated the imperial throne like a backstage prop, insisting on performing in public theaters despite laws forbidding nobles from such undignified acts. His obsession wasn't mere eccentricity, it was a calculated rebellion. By casting himself as an artist, he shattered every convention of what a leader should be, forcing Rome to watch as he rewrote the script of power. His performances were anything but voluntary for audiences. Senators who dozed off during his 4-hour lyre recitals found themselves exiled or fined. When he staged Greek tragedies, the doors were locked to prevent escapes, and rumor has it guards patrolled the aisles to ensure no one left before the final bow. The cruel irony, Nero's voice was reportedly thin and grating, yet critics who dared mention it faced brutal consequences. One unfortunate writer compared his singing to a donkey's bray and was promptly forced to swallow poison. The emperor didn't just crave applause, he demanded worship, blurring the line between artist and tyrant. But his most outrageous act came in Greece. During his grand tour, Nero entered the Olympic Games as a charioteer and won every event despite reportedly tumbling out of his chariot mid-race. How judges too terrified to declare otherwise, he swept the artistic competitions too, returning to Rome with over 1,800 victory crowns, a farcical haul that turned the ancient world's most sacred contests into a punchline. The Greeks played along, even postponing the games by a year to suit his schedule, but their laughter likely hid seething resentment. Behind the spectacle lay a darker truth: Nero's art was a weapon. By dominating stages and stadiums, he forced Rome to see him as both emperor and idol, a dual role that eroded the Senate's authority. When the Great Fire ravaged the city, gossips whispered he sang of Troy's destruction while flames spread, a myth, but one that stuck because it fit his carefully crafted persona. In the end, his performance proved his downfall. Fleeing assassins, his last words weren't of statecraft but of artistry. "What an artist dies in me." A fitting epitaph for a ruler who treated his empire as a captive audience. Queen Victoria's reign defined an era of empire and industry, but few know she also dipped her royal fingers into the birth of computer science. While history paints her as the dour widow in black, she had a razor-sharp mind for innovation, so much so that she became the first monarch to witness a computer algorithm in action. It happened in 1843 when she and Prince Albert visited Charles Babbage's workshop. There, among the brass gears and punch cards of his unfinished analytical engine, the Queen watched as Babbage demonstrated how his mechanical marvel could calculate complex sequences. Victoria, far from baffled, grasped the implications instantly, calling it extraordinary magic made useful. This wasn't just a passing curiosity. The Queen developed a genuine fascination with Babbage's work, even studying the engine's logic sheets, early versions of computer code penned by mathematician Ada Lovelace. Court journals reveal Victoria spent hours discussing the machine's potential with Albert, who shared her enthusiasm for science. Imagine the scene: the ruler of the world's most powerful empire hunched over schematics, debating whether gears could someday compose music or predict tides. While her ministers fretted over colonies and coal, she pondered a future where machines thought. The real twist: Victoria might have helped fund Babbage's research. Private letters hint at undisclosed royal grants to keep his project alive after government support dried up. Though the analytical engine was never completed, the Queen's interest planted a seed. Decades later, her grandson Kaiser Wilhelm II would dabble in early computing too, proof that Victoria's legacy wasn't just political. She glimpsed the digital age before Edison perfected the light bulb. What makes this story unforgettable is the contrast. The same Queen who embodied tradition also championed an invention most of her subjects couldn't comprehend. While her name became shorthand for rigid morality, her notebooks overflowed with questions about steam-powered calculation. Perhaps that's the lesson: even the most seemingly conventional rulers hide revolutions in their hearts. Victoria didn't just wear a crown, she peered through it into a future she'd never see but helped imagine. Buried beside King Tutankhamun's mummy lay a dagger that defied time and Earth itself. When archaeologists first uncovered the blade in 1925, Its unrusted, gleaming surface after 3,000 years hinted at something extraordinary. But it took nearly a century for science to reveal the full truth. This wasn't just an ancient weapon. It was forged from metal that had traveled through the cosmos, a literal piece of the stars placed in the boy king's grasp. The dagger's celestial origins were confirmed in 2016, when researchers used X-ray fluorescence spectrometry to analyze its composition. The blade contained high levels of nickel and cobalt, with traces of iron-matching meteorite samples from the Red Sea. Even more astonishing, the precise craftsmanship. Ancient Egyptian metalworkers had cold-hammered the meteoritic iron at low temperatures, a technique that preserved its rare crystalline structure. Proof they understood this sky metal behaved differently from terrestrial ores. But why gift a pharaoh a dagger from the heavens? In Egypt's cosmology, iron was sacred, often called the bone of the gods. Texts describe it raining from the sky, a divine material linked to Horus and the solar bark that carried the sun across the sky. Burying Tut with such a blade wasn't just practical, it was symbolic armor for his journey through the afterlife, a weapon fit to battle cosmic demons. The dagger's discovery reshapes our view of ancient technology. While Europe languished in the Bronze Age, Egypt's artisans were mastering extraterrestrial materials possibly centuries before iron smelting became widespread. Some scholars believe meteoritic iron was even more prized than gold, reserved exclusively for royalty and deities. Yet the greatest mystery remains unsolved. Where did the original meteorite land? No impact crater matching the dagger's composition has been found in Egypt. Perhaps the material was traded across vast distances, or maybe the celestial rock was recovered from a now-vanished sacred site. Either way, Tut's dagger stands as a testament to humanity's oldest fascination, the longing to touch the stars and the rulers who turned that dream into reality. Isabella of Castile didn't just command armies from a gilded tent. She aimed a crossbow bolt straight through the heart of medieval sexism. During the brutal siege of Granada in 1491, the queen shocked her generals by riding into the battlefield's edge, her polished armor glinting as she loaded and fired at the city's defenders. This wasn't symbolic posturing. Chronicles confirm she spent weeks training with master archers to master the weapon's heavy draw weight, her fingers blistering until she could hit targets at 200 paces. While other monarchs delegated violence, Isabella insisted on sharing its weight, telling her troops, "A kingdom won by others' blood alone is no kingdom at all." The crossbow itself was a calculated choice. Unlike longbows requiring lifelong training, it allowed a determined novice like Isabella to achieve lethal accuracy quickly, but wielding one still demanded brute strength. Her customized weapon, now displayed in Madrid's Army Museum, featured a crank mechanism to assist with loading, yet witnesses reported she often forewent it, pulling the string back raw-handed to prove her resolve. Muslim chroniclers, accustomed to seeing queens as distant figureheads, wrote of the steel-eyed Christian woman who shot like a man, their disbelief echoing across enemy lines. But here's what textbooks omit. Her battlefield presence wasn't just about courage, it was psychological warfare. By positioning herself where Granada's defenders could spot her through the smoke, her crimson surcoat unmistakable, she became a living taunt. The same queen who negotiated treaties in flawless Arabic now demonstrated she'd fight in person if peace failed. When a cannonball once struck near her position, she didn't retreat but ordered the artillery moved closer, quipping, "God dislikes cowards and so do I." The siege climax reveals her true genius. As Granada's gates finally crumbled, Isabella entered not in triumph but in humility, wearing a simple white gown. The warrior queen had vanished. In her place stood a diplomat offering terms. Yet every Moorish elder who knelt knew the unspoken truth: those merciful hands had held a weapon that could kill and chose to lower it. Her crossbow wasn't just a tool of war, it was theater, a reminder that power wears many faces and the deadliest rulers know when to switch between them. History remembers Isabella for the Alhambra decree or funding Columbus, but her real legacy lies in that singular image, a woman balancing a loaded crossbow on her saddle, redefining what it meant to be both sovereign and soldier. In an age where queens were expected to birth heirs and host banquets, she carved her authority into history with steel-tipped certainty, one defiant shot at a time. Charlemagne didn't just carve an empire out of war, he built it on books. While most conquerors measured their legacy in land and loot, this Frankish king obsessed over something far more enduring: education. At his palace in Aachen, he launched Europe's first state-run school for nobles, not to groom warriors but to create thinkers. And here's the twist: he enrolled himself as a student, humbling his ego nightly under flickering candlelight as he struggled through Latin grammar alongside teenage aristocrats. For a ruler who couldn't write his own name until middle age, this wasn't just reform, it was personal redemption. The palace school became the heartbeat of the Carolingian Renaissance, a deliberate revival of Roman and Christian scholarship after centuries of decline. Charlemagne recruited Europe's brightest minds like Alcuin of York, a scholar so revered the king gifted him entire monasteries just to keep him teaching. Their curriculum blended ancient wisdom with practical skills, astronomy for timekeeping, rhetoric for diplomacy, even basic medicine. But the real revolution was in who attended. For the first time, high-born girls studied alongside boys, with Charlemagne's own daughters mastering philosophy and poetry. One contemporary chronicler gasped at the sight of noblewomen debating Virgil, calling it a miracle rivaling the loaves and fishes. What's often overlooked is how shrewd this was politically. By binding nobility to the classroom, Charlemagne ensured loyalty through shared struggle. Imagine Frankish warlords, more comfortable with axes than alphabets, sweating over parchment as the king, still Europe's mightiest warrior, publicly stumbled through translations. His failures were calculated theater. When he botched a Latin declension, he'd joke, "Better a humble pupil than an ignorant king," disarming critics who mocked his late start. Meanwhile, his graduates became imperial administrators, spreading standardized scripts and laws that unified his vast realm. The school's legacy outshone its short existence. Those scribes developed Carolingian minuscule, the crisp, legible script that became the blueprint for modern European typefaces. Copies of ancient texts saved from decay by Charlemagne's scriptoria fueled the later Italian Renaissance. Even his obsession with correct pronunciation left marks. Modern French and German dialects trace their roots to his language reforms, but the most telling detail: Charlemagne slept with a wax tablet under his pillow, practicing letters by feel in the dark. A conqueror who rebuilt civilization not by the sword, but by the stubborn stroke of a stylus. When he died, they buried him seated upright, a book in his lap, eternally poised to learn. Wu Zetian didn't just seize China's throne, she wrote her way onto it, one carefully crafted poem at a time. In a world where Confucian scholars dismissed women as unfit to rule, this ruthless empress turned poetry into her sharpest weapon, wielding brushes instead of blades to carve her legitimacy. Her most famous work, Ode to the Peony, wasn't just flowery verse, it was a political manifesto disguised as nature worship. By praising the peony as the king of flowers, she drew a deliberate parallel to her own unprecedented reign, casting herself as both delicate and dominant, a blossom with thorns. Scholars gasped as she appropriated masculine imagery, comparing her rule to the unshakable mountain peaks and relentless rivers traditionally reserved for male emperors. But the real stroke of genius came in how she hijacked Buddhist scripture. When critics accused her of usurping the Tang dynasty, Wu Zetian commissioned poems reincarnating herself as the future Buddha Maitreya, a divine figure prophesied to bring cosmic order. Suddenly, her rise wasn't treason, it was destiny. She even staged public readings where monks chanted these verses like sacred texts, blurring the line between palace edicts and spiritual revelation. Imagine the audacity, a woman rewriting heaven's mandate to fit her ambition. Her propaganda machine didn't stop there. Wu Zetian cleverly resurrected the Rhapsody on the Goddess of the Luo, an ancient poem about a divine feminine figure, but with a twist. She inserted veiled references to her own policies, framing her governance as heaven-sent wisdom. When drought struck, she distributed poems comparing her tears for the starving peasants to the goddess's compassion, turning disaster into proof of her virtue. Even her harshest decrees were cloaked in lyrical elegance. Executions became pruning the garden for spring, and purges were sweeping autumn leaves. The brilliance lay in her dual audience. For scholars, she layered classical allusions only the educated could decode, flattering their intellect while demanding loyalty. For commoners, she simplified themes into catchy folk songs sung in marketplaces, making imperial propaganda as contagious as a peasant's ditty. By the time she declared herself emperor in 690, opposition didn't just seem treasonous, it felt unnatural, like rejecting the seasons themselves. Yet the ultimate irony, this master of poetic manipulation met her downfall through verse. When courtiers finally rebelled, they weaponized her own tactics, circulating anonymous poems comparing her to a wilted peony, its petals crushed by winter. Even deposed, Wu Zetian had the last word. Her final poem, written in exile, portrayed her as a setting sun whose light would linger long after dark, a fitting epitaph for the ruler who proved words could conquer what swords could not. Richard the Lionheart's legendary courage came at a price even England's treasury couldn't easily stomach, an astronomical ransom that would bleed his kingdom dry. Captured by Duke Leopold of Austria in 1192 on his way home from the Crusades, the warrior king found himself locked in a castle not by enemy swords, but by something far more binding, a demand for 150,000 marks, a sum equal to 3 times England's entire annual income. To put that in modern terms, it's like a billionaire being asked to cough up $300 billion overnight. The sheer audacity of the number left Europe gasping, but what happened next was even more extraordinary. The money was paid, penny by painful penny, thanks to the iron will of a woman history often overlooks, his mother, Elena of Aquitaine. At 70 years old, Elena should have been enjoying retirement in some sunny French chateau. Instead, she became England's chief tax collector, squeezing silver from every corner of the realm. Monasteries were forced to surrender their precious sacramental plates. Noblemen handed over a quarter of their incomes. Even churches saw their gold candlesticks melted down into coins. But Elena's real genius lay in her ruthlessness. She taxed wool exports, levied a special Saladin tithe on citizens, and confiscated the crown jewels as collateral. When that still wasn't enough, she turned her court into a fundraising hub, hosting tournaments where knights had to pay hefty fees to compete, all while spinning Richard's captivity as a national shame that demanded sacrifice. The logistical nightmare of transporting the ransom would have broken lesser rulers. The silver alone weighed over 12 tons, requiring a small army of guards and wagons to haul it across Europe. Contemporary accounts describe chests so heavy they broke axles, and bribes paid to bandit lords just to ensure safe passage. And here's the kicker: when the money finally reached Germany, Richard's captors initially refused to release him, demanding an additional 50,000 marks as a processing fee. Only Elena's threat of excommunicating every noble involved made them back down. What makes this story unforgettable isn't just the ransom size, but its aftermath. England was left bankrupt, its infrastructure crumbling under the debt. Peasants starved as taxes diverted grain shipments, and resentment festered into rebellions. Yet Richard, ever the warrior, spent barely 5 months in England after his release before rushing off to fight in France again, leaving Elena to clean up the financial wreckage. The ultimate irony: the ransom money funded the very armies that later threatened England, as Leopold used it to fortify Austria's defenses. Elena's triumph came at a brutal cost, but it also proved something revolutionary. In an age where kings were supposed to protect their people, this aging queen turned the tables, showing that sometimes the mightiest act of leadership isn't wielding a sword but balancing the books. Catherine de' Medici arrived in France with more than just political ambitions. She brought an entire culinary revolution in her dowry chest. When this 14-year-old Florentine bride married Henry II in 1533, French nobles were still eating with their hands, tearing meat straight from communal platters. But Catherine insisted on something scandalously refined: individual forks, a novelty she'd grown up with in Italy. Courtiers gasped as she daintily speared morsels with the slender silver tool, whispering that it was sinful to avoid touching God's bounty directly. Yet within a decade, no French aristocrat would dare be seen without her influence turning what was once pretentious into proper etiquette. But forks were just the appetizer. Catherine's true legacy unfolded in her kitchens, where she installed an army of Italian chefs who transformed French fare forever. Before her reign, French feasts were hearty but crude, endless roasts swimming in grease, bread serving as edible plates. Catherine's cooks introduced delicate sauces, artichokes glazed with butter, and the revolutionary concept of serving dishes in sequential courses. Her banquets became theatrical spectacles, sugar sculptures of mythological scenes, pies that burst open to release live birds, and the first recorded use of ice cream in France, a flavored snow concoction served in gold leaf cups. Guests left these events not just fed but dazzled, carrying tales of this new, hot cuisine across Europe. The artichoke became her edible emblem. Importing crates of the thorny vegetable from Florence, Catherine made them a status symbol at court. When skeptics claimed they were poisonous, she hosted an entire dinner where every dish, from soup to dessert, contained artichokes, daring her nobles to join her. Those who hesitated missed out. Her chefs had perfected techniques like braising the hearts in wine and frying the leaves to crispy perfection. Today, France's love affair with artichokes traces straight back to that defiant meal. Yet her most lasting contribution was invisible: the notion that food could be political power. Each banquet was meticulously calculated, alliances formed over sherbet, rivals humiliated by seating arrangements, marriages negotiated between bites of truffle-stuffed pheasant. When Protestant leaders dined at her table, she served dishes shaped like Catholic symbols, a delicious warning wrapped in pastry. Even her famed flying in trays dishes rushed from kitchen to table to ensure perfect temperature were really about control, proving her court operated with clockwork precision. The irony: while Catherine plotted wars and massacres, her culinary innovations softened France's rough edges, laying the groundwork for the country's gastronomic dominance. That legacy outlasted her turbulent reign after all. It's easier to forget the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre when your fork is poised over the perfect béarnaise sauce. The next time you savor French cuisine, remember, every bite carries a taste of Medici ambition. Gustavus Adolphus didn't just lead armies, he reinvented them. When this Swedish king stormed onto the battlefields of the 30 Years' War in the 1600s, Europe's military playbook was still stuck in the past. Rigid formations, lumbering cannons, and soldiers dressed like patchwork quilts. But Adolphus saw chaos as an opportunity. His first move, outfitting every man in identical blue and yellow uniforms, a seemingly simple change that transformed his troops into a cohesive machine. For the first time, commanders could spot their units instantly amidst the smoke and bloodshed, while enemy forces wasted precious seconds telling friend from foe. Then came the artillery revolution. While other armies treated cannons as immobile siege weapons, Adolphus shrank them into lightweight, leather guns, portable enough for horse teams to redeploy mid-battle. These weren't just tools of destruction, they were chess pieces, constantly shifting to punch holes in enemy lines where least expected. His infamous Swedish salvo tactic had infantry firing in disciplined, rotating volleys, maintaining a relentless hailstorm of lead while opponents fumbled with slow musket reloads. Imagine facing an army where every third man was reloading while the rest kept shooting, a deathly rhythm no European force had encountered before. The true stroke of genius, though, lay in his combined arms approach. Adolphus broke infantry into smaller, agile brigades that could pivot on a dime, supported by cavalry units trained to charge after musket volleys softened targets, not before as tradition dictated. His pikemen didn't just defend, they advanced in lockstep with gunners, creating moving fortresses of steel and gunpowder. The result, at Breitenfeld in 1631, his outnumbered Swedes annihilated the Holy Roman Empire's elite forces, losing barely 2,000 men to their enemies' 12,000. But here's what history books often miss. Adolphus's innovations weren't just about winning battles. They democratized warfare. By standardizing equipment and drilling peasants into professionals, he proved victory didn't require aristocratic knights, just smart tactics and a well-organized army. His reforms rippled far beyond Sweden. Within decades, every European power was copying his blueprints, from standardized uniforms to mobile artillery. Even Napoleon, 2 centuries later, would build on Adolphus's concepts of rapid movement and concentrated firepower, the ultimate testament to his influence. Modern military ranks still echo his structure, and that iconic blue and yellow uniform evolved into the camouflage patterns worn by soldiers today. Gustavus Adolphus didn't just fearlessly charge into battle, he engineered the very idea of what an army could be. Helena of Aquitaine didn't just preside over castles, she held court over hearts and minds, transforming her palaces into laboratories of love. At a time when marriage was often little more than a political transaction, this remarkable queen carved out space for something radical: the notion that romance could be an art form worthy of poetry, debate, and even rules. In her famed Court of Love, held at Poitiers in the 1200s, Helena and her daughter Marie of Champagne assembled troubadours, nobles, and thinkers to dissect affairs of the heart with the same seriousness scholars gave to theology. The sessions weren't just salacious gossip, they were a cultural revolution in velvet gloves. The troubadours who flocked to Helena's circle didn't just sing of knightly valor, they wove intricate verses about longing, devotion, and the ache of unrequited passion. Their lyrics, performed in the Occitan language of southern France, introduced concepts like finema, refined love, that idealized emotional connection over dynastic duty. Imagine the shockwaves when songs portrayed adultery not as sin, but as a noble pursuit when true hearts were mismatched by politics. Helena's patronage gave these artists protection and prestige, ensuring their ideas spread from Aquitaine's sun-drenched courtyards to the farthest reaches of Europe. At the center of it all stood Helena's love courts, where aristocratic women, yes, women, presided as judges over hypothetical cases of romance. A knight might plead, can true love exist between husband and wife? Or is jealousy proof of devotion? The verdicts, often penned by Helena herself, became a kind of code governing chivalric behavior. One infamous ruling declared love impossible in marriage, since what lovers give freely, spouses owe by duty. It was a direct challenge to the era's power structures, wrapped in the elegance of verse. But here's what textbooks rarely mention: this wasn't just idle entertainment. Helena's Court of Love was political theater. By elevating the language of desire, she shrewdly shifted cultural values to favor the aristocracy's educated elite over brutish warlords. Knights who once boasted of battlefield kills now competed to compose the most exquisite love ballads, proving their refinement. Even the church couldn't ignore the movement. Clerics grudgingly adopted romantic imagery, painting saints as celestial beloveds to keep pace with the zeitgeist. The legacy: Helena's salon birthed the Arthurian romances we know today. Chrétien de Troyes, her court star storyteller, crafted Lancelot and Guinevere, embedding her ideals of passionate, if doomed, love into Europe's DNA. Centuries later, Dante would cite troubadour poetry as divine inspiration, and modern romance novels still echo the tropes she popularized, all because one queen dared to ask, what if love wasn't just a contract but a conquest of the soul? Akbar the Great didn't just rule an empire, he curated a collision of celestial ideas under one roof. In the heart of Fatehpur Sikri, the Mughal emperor built a sanctuary unlike any other, the Ibadat Khana, or House of Worship. But this was no ordinary chapel. Within its sandstone walls, Jesuit priests debated Sufi mystics, Hindu pundits parried with Zoroastrian scholars, and Buddhist monks exchanged philosophies with Sunni clerics, all at the personal invitation of a Muslim king who thirsted not for conversion but conversation. While Europe burned heretics and the Inquisition raged, Akbar staged intellectual tournaments where the only weapon was wisdom and the prize was truth itself. These gatherings were anything but polite symposiums. Eyewitness accounts describe fiery exchanges where Jesuit fathers brandished crucifixes to make their points, while Hindu scholars quoted the Vedas in fluent Persian. Akbar, seated on a low cushion to signal humility, absorbed every word, often mediating disputes with questions that cut to the core. If God is one, why do paths to him differ? Can a soul find liberation without rituals? His courtiers recoiled when he adopted elements from each faith, lighting Hindu-style lamps, honoring the Zoroastrian sacred fire, even composing hymns blending Islamic and Bhakti poetry. To traditionalists, it bordered on blasphemy. To Akbar, it was practical divinity. The real stroke of genius, he turned theology into statecraft. By granting Jains tax exemptions for their pacifism, protecting Hindu temples, and even banning cow slaughter to respect Brahmin sentiments, Akbar wove religious tolerance into his empire's legal fabric. His Din-i-Ilahi, or divine faith, wasn't so much a new religion as a patchwork of universal ethics stressing kindness, reason, and service across dogmas. Critics mocked it as a ruler's vanity project, but the results spoke louder. Rebellions dwindled, trade flourished, and artists from all creeds collaborated on masterpieces like the Akbarnama, a visual love letter to pluralism. Yet the Ibadat Khana's brightest legacy was its humanity. When a Portuguese priest scoffed that non-Christians were donkeys before God, Akbar didn't exile him. He challenged him to prove it with logic, not insult. A Sufi saint once teased the emperor for his eclectic tastes, calling him a bee sipping every flower. Akbar shot back, but the bee makes honey, does it not? In that moment, you glimpse his real ambition, not just to govern bodies, but to cultivate minds. 4 centuries later, as sectarian violence still scars our world, those sandstone walls whisper a radical idea, that the truest throne might be a debating chamber where every voice gets a hearing and heaven has many doors. Mary, Queen of Scots, didn't just write letters in captivity, she weaponized them, turning ink and paper into tools of conspiracy. Locked away in English castles for 18 years, she smuggled out messages so ingeniously coded that even Elizabeth I's best spies initially hit dead ends. These weren't simple substitutions where A became B. Mary's ciphers were labyrinthine masterpieces, mixing symbols, Greek letters, and even musical notation to cloak her plots. One surviving letter to her supporters contains over 50 unique cipher signs, with meaningless nulls sprinkled throughout to mislead interceptors. To the untrained eye, it looked like the ramblings of a bored prisoner. In reality, every squiggle held treasonous weight. The process was cloak and dagger poetry. Mary's loyal servants would hide tiny, rolled cipher sheets inside hollowed-out corks or sewn into the soles of shoes, while her network of Catholic sympathizers relayed them across England. When she received replies, she'd decode them using a cipher key disguised as an innocent needlework pattern, stitches representing letters, her embroidery hoop a decoder ring. For years, this system worked flawlessly, letting her coordinate with conspirators aiming to overthrow Elizabeth and restore Catholicism. The fatal twist came when Elizabeth's spymaster, Sir Francis Walsingham, infiltrated Mary's web. Instead of intercepting every letter, he allowed some through, then painstakingly reverse-engineered her cipher over months. His breakthrough, recognizing that Mary's team reused certain symbols for common words like the and queen. Once he cracked those, the rest unraveled like a smuggled thread. The decoded letters revealed Mary's explicit support for the Babington plot, a scheme to assassinate Elizabeth. That evidence sealed her fate. The cipher meant to protect her became the noose around her neck. Centuries later, modern codebreakers at the National Archives re-examined Mary's letters using frequency analysis software, the same technique that cracked Nazi Enigma codes. They discovered layers even Walsingham missed, embedded personal jokes in French, hidden names of allies written backward in cipher. One letter's margins contained tiny dots forming a cross, likely a secret signal of faith to her readers. The irony, Mary's elaborate codes were both her downfall and her salvation. While they betrayed her to Elizabeth, they also preserved her voice across centuries. Today, those encrypted pages let us hear not just a queen plotting, but a woman clinging to agency when the world had stripped her of everything else, one scrambled symbol at a time. Peter the Great didn't just build St. Petersburg or modernize Russia, he collected teeth. Specifically, teeth yanked from the mouths of his own courtiers, often with more enthusiasm than medical necessity. This wasn't some gruesome punishment, it was the Tsar's idea of a hands-on hobby. Imagine being a nobleman in Peter's court, dressed in your finest silks, only to feel the royal grip on your shoulder and hear the dreaded question, "Does that tooth trouble you?" Whether it did or not hardly mattered. Peter saw dentistry as another skill to master, and his subjects were unwilling practice dummies. His fascination with teeth wasn't random. During his famous travels through Europe, Peter had studied anatomy and even assisted in surgeries, determined to drag Russia into the scientific age. But where other monarchs might fund hospitals or sponsor scholars, Peter preferred direct participation, scalpel in hand. Court records describe him gleefully brandishing a pair of pliers, chasing down dignitaries with offers of treatment. Some victims, like General Admiral Fyodor Apraksin, endured multiple extractions just to humor their ruler. One diplomat wrote home in horror after watching Peter wrench a perfectly healthy molar from a trembling noble, only to proudly display it like a trophy. The irony, Peter's dental expertise was dubious at best. While he amassed a chest full of pulled teeth, a macabre collection, he'd sometimes show visitors his techniques were more butcher than barber-surgeon. Yet this bizarre habit reveals something deeper about his rule. Peter didn't just want to govern Russia, he wanted to remake it personally and physically. If reforming the military, bureaucracy, and fashion wasn't enough, even the bodies of his subjects became projects. His tooth-pulling sessions were power plays disguised as philanthropy, reminders that no aspect of life was beyond his reach. The darkest twist, some historians suspect Peter used his dentistry as a loyalty test. Those who flinched or refused risked falling from favor, while those who endured the agony won his trust. A few savvy courtiers even pretended to have toothaches, volunteering for extractions to prove their devotion. The message was clear: in Peter's Russia, even pain could be patriotic. Yet for all the brutality, there's an oddly progressive thread here. Peter's obsession with anatomy teeth helped break taboos about the human body in Orthodox society, paving the way for modern medicine. His personal collection of extracted teeth, now preserved in St. Petersburg's Kunstkamera Museum, stands as a jarring symbol of a ruler who didn't just reign from a throne but got his hands dirty, sometimes bloody, in the name of progress. The next time you dread a dentist visit, remember, it could have been worse. You could have had Peter the Great leaning over you, grinning with pliers. Hatshepsut didn't just break Egypt's glass ceiling, she glued on a beard and dared anyone to question her right to rule. When this cunning queen declared herself pharaoh in 1479 BC, she faced a problem no man ever had: how to command respect in a role that had always been male. Her solution, a carefully crafted illusion of duality, blending the trappings of kingship with the reality of her femininity, the most striking symbol of this balancing act. The ceremonial false beard she wore during official ceremonies, strapped to her chin like a golden strap of divine authority, this wasn't mere costume play. In Egyptian cosmology, the pharaoh's beard, often curled at the end in the style of the god Osiris, wasn't just facial hair. It was a direct link to the gods, a physical marker of legitimacy. By adopting it, Hatshepsut didn't pretend to be a man. She asserted that her womanhood was irrelevant to her divine mandate. Art from her reign walks this tightrope masterfully. In statues, she appears with the traditional male kilt and muscular torso, yet inscriptions still refer to her as the daughter of Ra. At Karnak Temple, reliefs show her both as a sphinx crushing enemies and as a queen making offerings to deities in elegant feminine dress. She didn't erase her identity, she expanded it, proving gender could bend beneath the weight of the crown. The beard was just one thread in a broader tapestry of propaganda. Hatshepsut rewrote her own origin story, claiming the god Ammon had fathered her, a tale immortalized in vivid temple carvings where the deity visits her mother in a cloud of divine fragrance. She embraced the title King of Upper and Lower Egypt, while still using feminine grammar in inscriptions. Even her grand mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri reinforced this duality, its terraces climbing toward the heavens like a ramp for the gods, adorned with scenes of her divine birth alongside records of a prosperous reign filled with trade expeditions and architectural wonders. But here's what most miss: Hatshepsut's strategies reveal the insecurity beneath the symbols. Later pharaohs tried to chisel her name from history, perhaps threatened by her success in a man's world. The beard wasn't just power, it was armor. When she sent ships to the mysterious land of Punt to bring back incense and ivory, reliefs show her officials marveling at the cargo, but Hatshepsut herself always appears in full regalia, beard included, as if daring posterity to remember her as anything less than pharaoh. The ultimate irony: that same beard may have saved her legacy. While her stepson Thutmose III defaced many of her monuments, he left the Karnak reliefs of her divine birth intact, perhaps because even he couldn't fully erase the image of a ruler who'd fused earthly and divine power so completely. Hatshepsut proved that in a world of rigid traditions, the sharpest tool of all might be knowing when to wear a mask and when to let it slip, just enough to remind everyone who you truly are. King John of England didn't just lose a battle or a castle, he lost an empire's ransom in a single afternoon, swallowed by swirling tides and quicksand. The year was 1216, and England's most despised monarch was fleeing rebel barons, his baggage train groaning under the weight of the crown jewels, golden chalices, and enough silver to buy a small kingdom. Then disaster struck in the murky marshes of the Wash estuary, where tidal rivers meet the North Sea. As John's convoy attempted to cross at low tide, the waters surged faster than expected, overtaking men and wagons in a churning flood. Witnesses later described screams swallowed by the waves, horses thrashing against their harnesses as treasure chests sank into the silt. By nightfall, the crown's most sacred relics, swords of state, coronation regalia, even the legendary jewels of Henry II, were gone, buried beneath the same waters that had seemed so shallow hours before. Theories about exactly what vanished that day range from plausible to fantastical. Medieval chroniclers claimed the lost hoard included the entire royal treasury, while later historians suspect it was mainly ceremonial items still priceless, but not enough to bankrupt the crown. Local legends insist some treasures were salvaged by quick-thinking servants or opportunistic fishermen, only to be melted down or sold secretly. One enduring myth claims the king's personal gem-incured cross was recovered centuries later by a farmer's plow, though no evidence supports it. The most tantalizing clue, in 1272, a royal clerk's inventory noted certain vessels of gold and silver dredged from the wash, suggesting at least some fragments were reclaimed. What makes this disaster so haunting isn't just the loss, it's the irony. John had been racing to reinforce his castles against rebel forces when the tides betrayed him. The very wealth meant to secure his crumbling authority became a symbol of its collapse. Days later, sick with dysentery and stripped of his regalia, he died at Newark Castle, whispering about the treasure the sea stole. Some scholars argue the psychological blow of the loss hastened his death, leaving his 9-year-old son Henry to inherit a realm both financially and symbolically diminished. Modern searches for the jewels read like detective novels. Victorian explorers dug up salt marshes with steam shovels, while 20th-century divers scoured the estuary with sonar, finding only Roman coins and medieval nails. The shifting sands and centuries of land reclamation have likely buried any remnants forever, though that hasn't stopped treasure hunters from dreaming. Perhaps the greatest legacy of John's folly is how it reshaped English monarchy. Future kings, wary of concentrating wealth in one vulnerable caravan, spread their treasures across fortified castles, a lesson paid for in gold and learned in brine. Maria Theresa didn't just birth heirs, she engineered a dynasty with the precision of a grandmaster playing chess. While most monarchs saw children as mere vessels for bloodlines, this Austrian empress turned her 16 pregnancies into a geopolitical weapon, placing her sons and daughters like living pawns across Europe's royal courts. Yet behind the cold calculus of arranged marriages lay a mother who personally oversaw her children's education, scribbling notes in the margins of their textbooks and demanding daily progress reports. Her letters reveal a woman torn juggling statecraft with bedtime stories, treaty negotiations with toddler tantrums, proving that even history's most formidable rulers couldn't escape the messy realities of parenting. Take the notorious matchmaking that paired her youngest daughter, Marie Antoinette, with France's Dauphin. While history remembers this as the ill-fated union that ended at the guillotine, Maria Theresa's original plan was shockingly practical. She dispatched 12-year-old Antoinette not with romantic dreams, but with a 70-page manual titled Conduct to be observed at the court of France, a meticulous guide covering everything from how often to change underwear daily, to combat Versailles' stench, to which nobles to flatter and which to ignore. The Empress even ordered her daughter's crooked teeth straightened with iron braces before the wedding, understanding that in diplomacy, even smiles were strategic. But here's what gets overlooked. Maria Theresa's approach to motherhood revolutionized royal upbringing. She broke tradition by nursing some infants herself, shocking a court where wet nurses were standard. She banned oppressive corsets for her girls until adolescence, insisting they needed freedom to grow. Her sons, meanwhile, endured military drills before breakfast and philosophy lessons after crafting rulers who could quote Locke while leading cavalry charges. This wasn't just parenting, it was nation-building by nursery. The sheer scale of her balancing act staggers modern minds. Between governing the Habsburg Empire through wars and reforms, she found time to arrange marriages for all 16 children while penning affectionate letters filled with gossip and nicknames. When smallpox killed her beloved daughter Maria Johanna, the Empress commissioned portraits of all her children alive and dead to hang in her private chambers, a silent testament to grief no crown could shield her from. Yet the ultimate irony lies in her legacy. For all her meticulous planning, Maria Theresa's web of alliances unraveled within a generation. Napoleon dismantled the carefully arranged marriages. Marie Antoinette's tragic fate became a cautionary tale. But perhaps the real lesson isn't in the strategy's success or failure. It's in the audacity of a ruler who believed she could shape nations by shaping her children, blending the personal and political in ways no monarch had dared before. The next time someone claims you can't have it all, point them to the empress who raised an empire and a kindergarten simultaneously. Montezuma's throne room wasn't just a seat of power, it was a roaring, squawking, slithering monument to nature's wonders. The Aztec emperor's private zoo in Tenochtitlan held creatures most of his subjects could scarcely imagine. Jaguars pacing golden cages, eagles with wingspans wider than a warrior's shield, even crocodiles hauled from distant swamps and kept in shimmering pools. But the real marvels were the tiny ones, hundreds of hummingbirds, their iridescent feathers flickering like living jewels in specially designed aviaries. This wasn't just a hobby, it was a calculated display of divine right, where every growl and chirp whispered that Montezuma commanded not just men, but the very forces of the natural world. Spanish conquistadors who witnessed the menagerie wrote breathless accounts of its scale. Bernal Diaz del Castillo described 10 pools for aquatic birds alone, while Hernán Cortés marveled at monkeys trained to dance for the emperor's amusement. The logistics boggled the mind. Parrots from the Amazon, pumas from the northern deserts, even rumored deer with antlers like trees, likely elk or caribou transported across mountains and jungles. Montezuma employed a small army of animal keepers, veterinarians to treat sick eagles, chefs preparing fresh meat for big cats, and artisans crafting delicate sugar sculptures to feed the hummingbirds. The zoo's layout mirrored Aztec cosmology, with predators representing solar deities near the palace's center, while water creatures embodied Tlaloc's realm at the edges. Every creature served a symbolic purpose. Jaguars, associated with the god Tezcatlipoca, projected raw power, while Quetzals, their emerald feathers more precious than gold, embodied Quetzalcoatl's wisdom. When Montezuma received foreign emissaries, he'd often host them beside the jaguar enclosures, the big cat's growls underscoring his unspoken threat, "See what obeys me." Yet the zoo also highlighted his role as nature's steward. Ritual feeding ceremonies showed animals eating from his hands, reinforcing the belief that he bridged the human and divine. The darkest twist: many animals weren't just for display. Sacrificial rites sometimes required exotic beasts, their blood seen as potent conduits to the gods. Spanish accounts describe jaguars and eagles being ceremonially slain alongside human captives during important festivals. Montezuma's zoo, then, was both a living tapestry of empire and a warehouse of sacred instruments, a place where beauty and brutality coiled together like serpents in the emperor's grasp. Today, archaeologists sifting through Mexico City's foundations occasionally find jaguar bones with golden collars or parrot skeletons, far from their native habitats, ghostly echoes of a ruler who turned predation into propaganda. In the end, Cortés destroyed the zoo during the siege of Tenochtitlan, but its legacy survives. Modern zoos trace their roots not to European menageries, but to this Aztec marvel. Montezuma understood something we often forget, that to control nature's wonders is to proclaim yourself something more than mortal. King George III's hands weren't just made for signing royal decrees, they were calloused from gripping plow handles and pruning shears. While history remembers him as the Mad King who lost America, his subjects knew a different monarch, Farmer George, the ruler who'd rather discuss turnip yields than taxation. At Windsor, he turned 500 acres into a working model farm, obsessively experimenting with crop rotation decades before it became standard practice. Witnesses described him trudging through mud in plain woolen clothes, personally supervising the planting of Swedish turnips and clover to rejuvenate exhausted soil. This wasn't pastoral dabbling, it was agricultural revolution with royal backing, as George funded innovative seed drills and even commissioned porcelain models of ideal livestock to educate farmers. The irony is almost cruel. The same king who pioneered scientific farming would later be depicted in spluttering rage, his quills shaking as he drafted missives against rebellious colonists. Yet during those tumultuous years, George found solace in his fields, writing detailed notes on manure composition between state crises. His notebooks reveal a mind deeply attuned to nature's rhythms, recording the exact date apple blossoms appeared each spring, or calculating how many sheep could graze a pasture without overgrazing. These weren't the ramblings of instability, but the meticulous observations of a man who trusted soil more than senators. Medical historians now suspect George's famed madness was actually porphyria, a metabolic disorder causing agonizing pain and erratic behavior. During flare-ups, ministers would find him wandering the gardens at Kew, babbling to trees like old friends. But in his lucid periods, he transformed British agriculture, introducing merino sheep from Spain and championing the Norfolk four-course rotation: wheat, turnips, barley, and clover, a system that doubled crop yields. His passion even birthed the Royal Windsor Agricultural Show, still held today. The darkest twist, George's farming legacy was nearly erased. Caricaturists painted him as a bumbling yokel, his straw hat and dirt-stained breeches proof of diminished wit. Yet modern analysis of his crop record shows razor-sharp logic. He predicted climate's impact on harvests with startling accuracy. Perhaps the real madness wasn't in the king's mind, but in a world that mocked a ruler for getting his hands dirty while quietly feeding his people. Next time you bite into an apple, remember, it might trace back to grafted saplings a king once tended between losing an empire and losing himself. From golden daggers forged from meteorites to secret love letters penned by tyrants, these stories peel back the gilded layers of monarchy to reveal something far more fascinating: real people. Who could have guessed that the fearsome Ivan the Terrible scribbled poetry to his wife, or that Frederick the Great's flute solos hid the melancholy of a wartime king? Even the most polished portraits in our history books crack under scrutiny, showing rulers who collected teeth, bribed enemies with ice cream, and whispered state secrets through embroidery patterns. These aren't just quirky footnotes, they're reminders that power never erases humanity, and that every crown sits atop a flawed, complicated individual. Think about it. We're taught to see kings and queens as chess pieces on a historical board, moving to the rigid rhythms of war and succession. But what if we listened closer? Behind the drumbeats of their reigns, you'll hear the rustle of Cleopatra's language notes, the scratch of Charlemagne's bedtime wax tablet, the splash of King John's treasures drowning in the wash. These moments don't diminish their legacies, they deepen them, proving that even the mightiest rulers faced insecurities, passions, and absurd obsessions just like the rest of us. Here's the real takeaway: history is never a single story. For every tale of Marie Antoinette's extravagance, there's a ledger proving her quiet charity. Behind Peter the Great's dental horrors lurked a genuine thirst for progress, and Hatshepsut's fake beard, less a disguise than a defiant middle finger to tradition. The past is a mosaic, not a monolith, and the more we question the familiar narratives, the richer it becomes. So don't let the dust settle on these hidden chapters. Grab a metaphorical brush and keep uncovering what textbooks omit, because every time we revisit history with fresh eyes, we're not just learning about kings and queens. We're rediscovering ourselves. Want more of these untold stories? Hit that subscribe button and let's keep pulling threads until the whole tapestry unravels. After all, the best secrets are still waiting between the